You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, everybody, and welcome along to the Today's Conveyancer podcast. This week, I'm joined by Dan Creed. Dan is the HR director at tmgroup, based in Swindon. Dan?
That's right, yep, Swindon, home base, yep.
Are you based in Swindon yourself?
I am, just based outside of Swindon, actually, a little town called Marlborough. Beautiful town, right in the heart of Cotswolds. It's a fantastic place to be. Sounds
idyllic, very nice. Probably worth at the start of this, just outlining your role and telling us a little bit about TM as an organisation, because this podcast isn't about searches. This podcast is going to be about culture. It's going to be about hybrid working and some of your experiences as HR director at a large tech organisation. So tell us your background, Dan. You're not from the searches business.
No, I'm not. No, I've got a very potted background, actually. In terms of, a lot of people say they fall into HR, and this was another classic example of literally falling into HR. So my background started at retail, and I worked for a retailer that had a tremendous opportunity back in the early 2000s of growing from one or two high street stores to just over 500 high street stores in the space of 6 years. So went on a journey, and of course my career advanced with that. To a point where I was no longer a store manager. I went into training and development and started to write the processes and protocols and knowledge sharing information that you generally would need with that type of growth. Moved on then to automotive. And again, I was quite specific about the type of industry. I love fast-paced businesses. I like businesses that have ambition. And I guess my pedigree comes from helping businesses grow and transition quickly. And then from there, went into hospitality and again, started with a business that had ambitions to grow. This time it was a hotel alternative called Service Departments, and it's a very little known industry, but a general business traveller would get quite sick of being in a hotel after a week or two. Well, we put apartments or flats out for lease where business owners would stay for 2 or 3 months and become almost self-catering. And that was a business model back in the mid-20 teens, actually, that took off extremely well. And again, that business, in terms of growth from around 100 employees to 300 over the course of about 18 months. TM came along, and this would be their first ever senior appointment with a HR professional to help tackle some of their transition and some of their growth ambitions. So the opportunity to join TM, first of all, as a head of HR was great. And most recently, that role has now become a HR director. And that for me has been, testament to TM's ambitions really around getting the people bits right. And you talked about culture and hybrid working. These are all things that perhaps probably sit more strategically within a HR remit, and one I'm thoroughly enjoying with TM currently.
And tell us a little bit about TM itself. How many staff? What's kind of the structure like?
Yeah, so TM, we've got four businesses under TM Group. So we've got Property Searches Scotland, who are based in Glasgow. There's about 35 employees in our business there. We have Neo, which is our estate agency brands, which are based out of our HQ in Swindon, which have a shared resource, but also their own resource. We have Conveyancing Data Services, who are based out of our Reading office. And then we have TM, which is our core business, which a lot of you would know in terms of TM Group, in terms of the branding. So when you combine all of those four businesses and the complexities, there's about 350 employees in total within the organisation.
And you must be doing something right, Dan, because TM Group have been nominated for 2 awards recently, one at the British Conveyancing Awards just a couple of weeks ago, and another at the UK Employee Excellence Awards, which are run by Reward Gateway. And you've had some success at the British Conveyancing Awards as well, winning the Employee Experience Award. What is it that TM Group are doing from a human resources point of view that is catching the eye?
Yeah, a really good question. I think I'm just going to go back a couple of years, really. And I think a lot of businesses have found themselves in this place. It's almost there's change coming. What do you do to put people at the heart of a strategy, or people at the heart of a HR strategy? And I think TM at the time, back end of 2019, were in that dilemma. And I guess as part of the approach, the best way to tackle this sort of thing is always to talk to the staff of the business. And I was fortunate enough, as part of my induction period of TM, to be able to spend quite a lot of time with the people in the business, understanding what's working, what isn't. And I think what came out of that has now sort of transpired 2 years later into sort of some of the key areas that we've been shortlisted on these awards. So I think that the big one for me is putting people at the heart of our people strategy, and not making it transactional, but making it real. And I think, putting trust and empathy and all those sorts of key things in terms of our day-to-day management of our staff have really helped us get where we are. Alongside that, there are a couple of other areas which, if you looked at a strategy or the pillars of a people strategy, investing in key training. The sector moves on at quite a rapid pace. So there's lots of technical knowledge needed. And I think it's important that we were doing something to address that, not only to help our staff, but also to our customers. And, the mantra we've had over the last 2 years in particular has been about service, service, service. And that training has been quite pivotal to enable us to deliver, the employee experience or the customer experience that we've tried to match up.
The conveyancing sector is currently in the throes of this return to work, return to the office, hybrid working solution. Have you at TM Group implemented a return to the office? Have you got a hybrid working policy?
We have, yes, and to be honest, we're one of the organisations that have sort of said this is fully flexible for everybody that works at the business. And I think alongside, you can do as much research as you want around hybrid working. I think you have to pay attention to the performance of the business over the last 2 to 3 years to really know that it's working well, and it certainly has done for us. And our staff recognise that they enjoy better work-life balance. They are more motivated, and I think that is a very positive outcome of moving to a hybrid policy in particular. There is also a large proportion of our team that miss the office, and I think I'm not the only one that speaks out. I also miss the office. I think that social aspect it's fascinating to be part of, but also you do feel an isolation when working from home. So we've tried to encourage both, really, and I think how we would see this being at TM is I think this has been by far the biggest shift that we were anticipating when it comes to flexibility over the last 2 years. I think it would have took us 20 years to get to this particular point. And a lot of businesses like ourselves have managed to get through it. And for us, it's important that the balance is right. There are some roles that can fly high, working remotely and deliver outstanding customer service and brilliance at individual jobs, and there are roles that actually are better suited from the office. And I think that balance is really important. And I know that when you look at the future of hybrid working, there are some organisations that are trialling the 4-day working week. They work on a basis of paying staff 100%, but for 80% of the hours, which sounds quite challenging, I think, from an employer's point of view. But I think they are reporting that there's no reduction in workload there. So TM isn't there yet, but it's one of those areas that we're studying very closely. And I imagine a few of the other organisations in the sector are also doing the same.
The topic of one of our most recent podcasts, Dan, the 4-day working week. And yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting development, particularly in legal services. And I think the whole sort of service element of the 4-day week is a real challenge because, of course, you're still working in an industry where the majority of the players are working 5 days a week. So how do you manage that process whereby somebody is unavailable? and what are the expectations on staff and all those kinds of things?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to navigate, I think. Yeah, I mean, you need to be there for your customers and your client base. You can't not be. I mean, I've been talking to some experts around the sort of human resources sector for a number of months around this particular topic. And, when you look at countries that are currently operating a 4-day working week, they're focusing on not just giving everybody a Friday or a Monday. There are different days of the week that people are taking off in those 4-day weeks. The balance of staffing and workforce planning are really critical to that, I think.
You've talked about training, you've talked about that hybrid working policy. How does that work in practice? How are you managing that process, and what are you doing differently?
Yes, I think our process is in reverse order. I think traditionally companies would go out and seek flexible working requests from staff, or staff would seek flexible working requests from companies. And I think where we took the standpoint, particularly in the middle of the pandemic, was actually that this needs to be in reverse order. Instead of staff requesting, we should just automatically give it as a right. And I guess accept that everyone will want to work from home. And I think if you get your business into that headspace, you can then start to work backwards and find the right balance really for the employee, but also for the business. A lot of businesses that I've spoken to or talked to, and the mentality, I think, is that acceptance still isn't there where people can work from home, and I think that's a difficult one to overcome. But once you have overcome it and you accept everybody will want to work from home, then the process then becomes a little bit easier. So how are we doing it differently? We've basically done it in reverse, and rather than assume everybody's back in the office, assume everybody will want to work from home, and then talk to staff about who wants to come back in. And that process has worked tremendously well for us. We're not there fully. We have staff that prefer to be in the office. We have systems and processes that still aren't in that hybrid world. But, we've made great strides over that last 2 years and continuously are changing how we're doing things. And I'm sure that we're not the only one doing the same.
One of the challenges I hear from legal services providers and also from around the conveyancing industry is this learning by osmosis challenge, that being in an office environment, being close to people who are more experienced than you're losing that opportunity to learn from peers by not being in the office. Is that a challenge that you recognise?
Yeah, completely. And I think I can completely concur in terms of that knowledge is power, right? And when you've got people that have worked for your business for a number of years, it's really important to transition that knowledge from one person to the other. And that becomes 10 times more difficult working remotely, although it's not impossible. And I think you've got to look at the different communication tools that are now in place to be able to help with that process. And that's one of the things that we've tried to learn from over the last couple of years, in particular across tmgroup, and trying to transition knowledge from each of those businesses into our key employees in terms of our client services or our sales teams. That becomes more difficult when you're working remotely, but we've managed to pick up quite a few tools which have helped embed that. We're big on collaboration sessions. We will try and get, in particular, as the pandemic sort of started to ease at the back end of last year, and certainly in the summer months when you have, lesser COVID restrictions in place, you're able to collaborate more and bring people together socially and help, I guess, transition some of that knowledge during conversations or staff get-togethers. And even in the heights of the pandemic, we set out as one of the HR team strategies actually to ask people how have they been, and that's not just a case of phoning someone up and saying, how are you? Are you okay? We purposefully selected 6 to 8 people from across the business in different roles to come together on a Teams chat for an hour and discuss business. And the purpose of that was to say, how have you been in terms of themselves, and share some of their stories, but also share some of the knowledge that potentially you miss the opportunity of sharing when you're not at a coffee machine or a water cooler in the office. So those sessions went down tremendously well, and everybody within TM Group had at least 2 or 3 of those over the course of the beginning of the pandemic, but also picked up some of those last year. Secondary to that, we also appointed an internal trainer as part of our investing in our sort of people strategy. We appointed one of our more knowledgeable team members into a training role to help with transitioning some of that knowledge from either a one-to-one basis or one-to-team basis. And that could be sort of a lunch and learn session. It could be a 2-hour punchy training session. It could be quizzes. There were different ways of varieties to help with that and maintain that. I do have to say, having 50 odd people back in the office now, we've probably done more in the last 4 to 6 weeks around that than probably what we managed to do, doing it remotely. I think you can't underestimate the impact of knowledge, when talking to people in the office. But there are ways around it to navigate around it, but it's a lot slower than what you would normally get in the office itself.
And then how do you manage to maintain the engagement with the staff that are working remotely? You talked about collaboration sessions, but there's much more to it than that, isn't there? How have you sort of managed to find that balance in new normal?
Yeah, how long have we got, David? There is a whole heap of things, and so much so much trial and error on our part. I think I'll try and summarise some of the key salient points here, but there are in excess of probably 30 initiatives that we've tried in the last 2 years. Not all of them have been successful, but actually a lot of them are stuck. And I think that's the key to when you are engaging staff, is finding things that are going to stick. And just some examples of that. I mean, we as an organisation identified very early on, actually pre-pandemic, that the business was in really good shape and very healthy, but we didn't have an identity internally. TM Group is a well-known brand externally, but when you look inside the business, who are TM Group? What do they stand for? Why do staff stay for so long at TM? And I think we needed to quantify that to then build an engagement plan on the back of. So you talked about what's catching the eye at the moment. Well, one of the things that we're very proud of here is around making TM a great place to work. And how did we get there? We needed to engage the staff first, to give them a voice, and get them to let us know what it is that they really enjoy about working at TM Group, and then we can start to build things on the back of that. And a couple of key nuggets came out of that. Well-being prior to the pandemic was high on the agenda of staff, so we needed to humanise that. And I think a lot of businesses, even today, have a poster up, but probably don't live it or breathe it. And we were quite keen to humanise it and make it personable. And the other thing was around looking at the employee experience. And we were so pleased with the judges' feedback from the awards that we won a couple of weeks ago, because we'd worked very hard around putting in place, I guess, the key nuggets of experience that you would expect to see in an employee's life cycle, from whether that's digital induction, digital onboarding, pre-people joining, digital recruitment, or right through to things like, how do you manage the perks during a pandemic? You're not in the office anymore, so you can't have free fruit and free cereal. So what could we do for people at home? So, we sent people hoodies or little packages every now and again, just to keep them motivated. It's almost an internal marketing hat went on, and looked after our people as much as we would look after customers. But I think the big thing for us was the caring and the empathising in our approach to management. And we'd spent a lot of time pre-pandemic and throughout the pandemic retraining our managers. And we partnered with an external training company, and we wrote a training programme called Mindful versus Mindful, with a double L. And I'll just explain a little bit about what that is. So Mindfulness, as we know, is sort of the Zen approach to things. But I think when you're mindful and you're mindful of others, you tend to delegate in a better way. In other words, you become clearer in terms of what's in your own mind of what the job is and what needs to get done. And I think the reason why we call it mindful versus mindful is because on the opposite side of that, the pandemic put so much anxiety and stress in terms of everybody's way that people's mind were preoccupied with things other than work. How am I going to look after my children when they're at home schooling and do my job at the same time? Or how am I going to make these hours work? I've got other things that I need to be doing at home. So we spent a lot of time educating our managers around actually how can you stop people's mind being so full and occupied of other things, and how can we clear that up a little bit and focus on small milestones or small goals. And that process and approach really helped manage the anxiety and stress levels within the organisation in the middle of the pandemic. And as we've come out the other side now, we're starting to, I guess, put more meat on the bones around actually how can you maintain that through things like goal setting processes or performance appraisal processes. So there's a lot that can be done to, I guess, to maintain engagement with staff, but also ensure that you're doing the right things around that employee experience. And I could go on for another hour, David, if you want me to. But that's just 2 or 3 of the key things that we've done so far.
This is more than putting a pool table in or putting a table tennis table in.
Without a doubt. I mean, everybody could put a poster up and buy a pool table from Amazon. That's absolutely what some businesses will choose to do. I think making it meaningful, and the word meaningful we use quite a lot across TM, is really important. If you're going to do something, make it meaningful. Where things are meaningful, they become more valuable to employees. And one of the things that we really, really value is talking to our staff. Quarterly staff surveys for us have been fantastic. And now more so, we can ask those questions in a more of a social setting, which, a lot of our staff are looking forward to doing. The other areas that we've tapped into is regularised communications, not emails, but trying to do communications differently, whether that's an Americanism town hall where everybody dials on together for a half an hour update, or whether one of the directors or heads of functions or managers or even staff members do a blog. There's lots of different ways I think that you can communicate. One of the key things, actually, just coming back to humanising well-being in the workplace, and this may be a striking fact or not, but I've not come across another organisation that's done this before, but we have more mental health first aid people trained in TM than first aiders. And that's a really important sort of shift, I think, when it comes to actually the kind of support that staff need. And, when you talk about caring and empathising, everybody needs something different. And those mental health first aiders have been absolutely fantastic over the last 2 years with TM. And I can't see in that switch change. I think we'll continue to have more mental health first aiders than first aiders, certainly for the short term, and certainly into a more hybrid working arrangement too. They've been fantastic.
The initiatives you've introduced, the way in which you've consulted with staff, this is about creating the right culture in the business, Dan. Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. And I think, a lot of businesses spend a lot of time and effort getting the culture right. I spoke earlier on about creating an identity, and I think for me that is an important starting point for any culture. You have to all be pulling in the right direction to have a good business culture, and a good business culture oobs experience. It helps from a recruitment point of view because you're positioning the business. Whoever comes into interview or whoever deals with the business on a virtual basis get a feel. And I think culture for me is about feeling. And one of the things that we decided to do here at TM was try and keep ours really simple, so that again, this is all sort of in the midst of the pandemic and even pre-pandemic, and TM have always had a very positive staff culture, but it was never really known what it is. So we created an identity that was very simple. Ours was just called Team TM. And, it might seem very simple on the outside, but actually all the bits that underpin it internally are really important. And, I also spoke a little bit around the word meaningful, during this podcast. And we wanted to make sure that, one, everybody felt part of a team. And, the first part of the pandemic, I mentioned that we sent all of our staff members hoodies, with TM logos on. Now, a lot of our team here have never had career wear before, in particular at TM. So a very positively received, gesture from the organisation. And then as part of that, there was a whole year's worth of communication and engagement activity planned, almost that internal marketing piece, to really hammer home some of the key messages within Team TM. We're a focused bunch, we're a fun bunch, we're friendly. Some of the real key words that our staff have used when sort of describing what it's like to work here. Through to the other side of going out of our way as a leadership team and as a board of directors, ensuring that our goals are crystal clear in terms of what we're trying to achieve and by when. And then cascading those and sharing those across every employee in the business. So every owner of goals within the organisation understands their part to play within that, so they can see their own work, featuring through right to the very top in the company performance. So I think those two things really are important. And then what you get on the back of those is you get a business that trusts each other, get a business that can communicate transparently, and you also get a set of managers and leaders that deliver on promises, which, trust me, as a HR director, many businesses that I've come across and worked for before, that is the one biggest thing that lets them down in a culture, is that we promise something and don't deliver. So we've worked really hard to make sure if we're delivering something or we're promising something, we stand by our word and we do it. And then there are other things which are, equally as important, working hard on finding the balance between work and life, which comes back to the hybrid working discussion that we've had during this podcast. And, always seeking the opinions of, all of our staff, really, to try and make change for the better. And hey, we feel we've got the right balance in the culture. We feel that we've done an enormous stride in terms of getting the business in shape. And, we over the last few weeks have been accredited with being one of the best companies to work for in the UK, and made the top 50 large companies to work for in the UK, which is a fantastic accreditation. And we talk about recruitment on the external, that badge above the door is fantastic for us. We will start to see, and have already started to see, people applying for jobs that we don't have. So you start to build a pool of CVs, a pool of talent before you even have to advertise. And that for me is a testament of actually how our brand value or our identity is being seen externally. Coupled with that, we're a top 50. We've also been listed as number 12 best tech company to work for in the UK. And as a tech company, we're very proud of that. The IT sector is in particular very difficult to recruit for, and having the best people developing our products for our customers is absolutely critical to our success. And of course, we've also seen some fantastic accolades for our Property Searches Scotland business, who have been voted number 4th best company to work for in Scotland, which to make the top 5 again is just fantastic. So, our culture is open, it's transparent, and I think our leaders here work hard to remove any hierarchy. We all have important jobs to do, and I think that's the bit that we try and get the balance on and get right.
That's really interesting, Dan. Thank you so much for joining. We've run out of time. We could probably talk about this for the next few hours, never mind a 20-minute podcast, but it's been really great of you to share some insight from your own journey over the last couple of years within TM. Thank you very much indeed for joining, and thank you very much indeed to everybody for listening. Keep your ear out for future Today's Conveyancer podcasts. You can download this on your preferred podcast provider, and it's also available on Today's Conveyancer. That's all for this week. Thank you very much indeed, Dan.
You're most welcome. No, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you, David.
And thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Today's Conveyancer podcast, the leading source of information for residential property lawyers in England and Wales. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todaysconveyancer.co.uk. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.